Let's talk about the US election. Dun, 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 dun. The biggest election in the world is playing out today. Americans are voting. The biggest political moment in the world. We all have to pay attention. We all have to follow this election because whatever America decides will affect what happens in Europe. It will affect what happens in Asia. It will affect what happens in Africa. We have to follow American elections, not necessarily to pick favorites. I understand you have favorites. You've probably picked a side. You've got a situation that you are preferring, right? But I think we need to think differently about American elections going forward. And I'm going to put something to you just now. I think one of our biggest mistakes as Africans is that we get too caught up in American things, Americanisms, Americana. We behave as if we are proxies for American politicians, rappers, etc., etc. Listen, whatever happens in Taylor Swift's life has got nothing to do with you. Whatever happens in Rihanna's life has got nothing to do with you. And whatever happens in Drake's life or Kendrick's life has got nothing to do with you. But we consume so much American culture, we become, in our own minds, in varying degrees, American citizens, diaspora of America, if you will, if you get what I'm trying to put across. And that's not necessarily helpful for us, especially in politics. Our biggest mistake over many years is becoming proxies for these American politicians. We internalize their disputes, their issues, etc. But we need to remember that we are Africans, and we need to think about this election from the African perspective, not the American perspective. We need to think about ourselves. That's how every other powerful group handles these types of elections. So the Chinese are going to think about themselves. The Russians are going to think about themselves. We as Africans must think about ourselves and observe this election, understanding that hasimu statesmen, we're not in America and we are not Americans. Right. Briefly, let's talk about what this election is going to be about. There's a lot of issues that you can see. And, watching American media can get quite frustrating at a time like this because so much noise, so much bias, so much, what can I say? Distortion, static, so much static. American politics have become so sophisticated that they know every step of manipulation, everything that needs to be done to try to manipulate different audiences and have them convinced to vote for one particular side or another side. Watching that from a distance, the noise is so loud, it becomes difficult to really get a feel for what everyday Americans are feeling and thinking because everything is curated. Focus groups, polls, think tanks, media shows, podcasts, you name it, everything is curated. But looking through all of that fluff, this election, in my opinion, is going to ride on 4 issues. 4. Number 1, inflation, or if you will, the economy. Number 2, identity. Number 3, immigration. Number 4, international relations. Whose international relations? America's international relations. Inflation. The economy is always a big issue in any election, and America is no exception. When Donald Trump left office in 2020, inflation was at 1.2%. In 2021, it was 4.7%. In 2022, it was 8%. In 2023, it was 4.1%, meaning that most of the years of the Biden administration, Americans were living in a high inflation environment. America is already very expensive, particularly for people who are living in the lower brackets of the economy. If you're making less than $60,000 a year, you are somebody who is really struggling to get by in the American economy. This is why we've seen Americans getting 2 jobs. The America we see now is not the America we used to see growing up on the sitcoms, if you're watching, whether it's what Family Matters, if you will, if you're watching My Wife and Kids, watching all of these things, it was always one dad with one job. What is that guy called? King of Queens or whatever his name was. Just thinking, I'm trying to diversify. The Rock, right? There was one called with the bald guy, right? Not The Rock, the wrestler. There was one which was called Rock. I can't remember. I'm trying to think of all of the American sitcoms I used to consume as a child. But nonetheless, back in those days, if you are a working class American, you would have one job and you would be able to get a mortgage, support your family, and live a life, go to baseball games, basketball games, that kind of stuff. Now, in this new American economy, where the inequality is very high, the cost of living is very high, what we are seeing is more and more Americans have to get two jobs. The American dream has turned into a working class nightmare, to be quite honest with you. And in those kind of situations, as well as a result of the outsourcing of a lot of American jobs, a lot of manufacturing was moved out of America into China because that was cheaper. What that created in a lot of manufacturing hubs was a loss of jobs, a loss of support. Also, the going green, moving away from coal to some degree, also took away some jobs. So there are parts of America which used to have this industrial work available to them, no longer have the industrial work available to them. What's the significance of that? Even though the American economy is posting strong numbers on the top end, that does not translate to the lived realities of many Americans. The cost of fuel, the cost of food, the cost, and these were high throughout the pandemic. But because even though people's salaries are going up, et cetera, because inflation was high, they didn't feel that. They didn't feel that translating. So at one level, when you think about the American economy, it feels like it's a well-performing economy. But when you look at what young Americans are saying, what millennials are saying, they're saying that they don't have an American dream. They cannot access promises. Now, coming as a candidate who is an extension of the Biden administration, Kamala is not going to do well on the economy. Donald Trump is viewed as having governed over a better economy. He's also credited with giving some of those stimulus checks in 2020. If you remember when the COVID pandemic was happening, they were signed with Trump's name. So many marginalized communities view him as being somebody who helped them and helped them buy stuff and get stuff. So the Trump years are viewed as having been better years than the Biden years. That's just the objective reality I'm telling you as it is. So inflation is going to be one of the issues. Economy is going to be one of the issues. But it's not the only issue. There are other issues. America has been really struggling with unity on a variety of levels. There are racial tensions. There are cultural tensions. We've seen pushback from the right wing around issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Them trying to craft a narrative that whenever you include black people, women, marginalized communities, that will deteriorate the quality of the work. They've been pushing back against affirmative action. We've seen also that there have been disputes, multiple disputes about gender. What is a woman? What is a man? All of these things, if you look in the black communities, police brutality, racial profiling, these are still issues that come up. And these issues have not gone away, and in some ways they have become exacerbated and exaggerated in the American discourse and in the American media attention. A lot of these issues are still real. Black people in America are still facing multiple forms of discrimination. Women in America are still facing multiple forms of discrimination. They're not getting equal pay. There's still a necessity in many companies. If you look at Apple, Google, all of these companies, if you look at their diversity reports, especially for technical stuff, especially for managerial stuff, you'll find that there are multiple discrepancies on the basis of race and gender. These issues are going to have a bearing on the election. There are many white Americans who feel like a fatigue to wokeness, and there's an anti-wokeness which is happening right now, and those people are likely to vote for Trump. There are many men who feel that they have been ostracized, demonized, left out, and pushed away, so to speak, by the Democratic Party. They feel as if the Democratic Party has become the party of woke, and they may not necessarily support that. And you'll see one of Trump's ads has been Kamala Harris is for they, them, and Trump is for you. And that is something that shows the divisions that currently exist. Polling has indicated that men are leaning more towards Trump and women are leaning more towards Kamala, and the difference is quite stark and quite dramatic. You can go and look for those particular polls. You'll see them quite stark, quite dramatic, showing that identity is going to be one of the big issues. Immigration, another big issue in the election. Kamala Harris was early on being asked if she's been to the border. Have you been to the border? We've been to the border. You've not been to the border. It was one of those memes. You can find it on the internet. Immigration has been a big issue, and Trump has campaigned very harshly on immigration. From the first time he went down that escalator, he has been making immigration one of his big talking points. Remember what he said? Mexico is not sending us its best people. Now he said Haitians are eating the cats, they're eating the dogs, they're eating the frogs, they're eating the logs, they're eating the songs, they're eating the... Ooh, Trump. It's hilarious, but it's not hilarious because talk about real people, and xenophobia is something that can arise as a result of this kind of political rhetoric. However, what we've seen is that Kamala has also tried to meet Trump halfway, if you will, because she still supports building the wall, extending the wall, all of that stuff. She's not going to do away with ICE, which is the immigration agency responsible for the deportations and stuff like that. But people view the democratic dispensation these last few years as having been bad for immigration, in that more illegal or undocumented people came in from South America into America. And you even saw Trump at some point telling, black people that these people are stealing their jobs, black jobs, quote unquote. And then there was a whole dispute about what are black jobs, what are you trying to say, etc., etc. The point is, though, immigration is going to be a big issue, and it's not a big issue on the side of the Democrats, it's a big issue on the side of the Republicans. Trump is viewed as being stronger on immigration. Then you have international relations, which is the fourth issue. There are big debates in America about what to do with Ukraine, what to do with Russia, what to do with Israel, what to do with Israel versus Gaza, Israel versus Hezbollah, Israel versus not Gaza, Israel versus Hamas, if you will, right? And while there is almost virtually no separation between the Democratic position and the Republican position on Israel versus Hamas and Israel versus Hezbollah, there is a difference in interpretation and approach on the European war, Russia versus Ukraine. Trump has indicated that he is more leaning towards being supportive of the Putin position, that NATO went too far, that a deal must be made. And that is a difference in the approach between how the Biden administration approached this, because they backed Zelensky. They've been very hostile and critical of Putin. And as a result, that has been one of the big issues. A lot of Republicans have actually started walking away from support for Zelensky. He's appeared in Congress many times, but you can see that there's not a lot of support for him, especially on the Republican side. If the Republicans win, they're likely to downscale American support and to try to wind up this particular conflict. But when it comes to Israel versus Hamas and Israel versus Hezbollah, and basically the war in Israel, Palestine, and Lebanon, what's likely to happen is that both candidates will continue to support Netanyahu, although it is my opinion that Trump will have a stronger voice on de-escalation of the conflict than Joe Biden has had. Because one, I think Netanyahu is more afraid of Trump, even though they have a stronger relationship than with Biden. But two, I also think that people are appreciative of the fact that Donald Trump doesn't actually like war, and he has tried multiple times to de-escalate conflicts. If you recall, he was having peace negotiations with the leader of North Korea. He tried to remove troops from Syria. He was unsuccessful, and it was him who initiated the withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan. It was implemented under Joe Biden in a very messy way. People say that Trump was responsible because he was rushing the withdrawal process. I'll leave that open to you to determine, because I'm not really trying to side with any of these people. I'm just trying to analyze and give you some of the issues so that you can think through what are going to be the big issues going into this. So when it comes to international relations, one of the challenges that Kamala Harris is facing is that because there's virtually no difference between her position and the Biden position and the Republican position, those who are pro-Palestinian, and there are a lot who are within the Democratic Party, some of them actually Arab Americans, live in one of the swing states, which is Michigan, are actually not likely to vote for her, and this could lead to suppression of turnout. Young Americans also very, very angry about the situation in Israel and Palestine, and view the Democratic position as actually to not be one that they can back, right? On the Republican side, a lot of people support that position, but so when it comes to turnout, enthusiasm, the position on Israel and Gaza can actually be one that will be disadvantageous to the incumbent, as opposed to the person who's out of office, who is Trump, who's trying to get back into office, right? So those are the dynamics as they pertain to international relations. There are other factors that are going to influence this particular election, right? Three things that I want to talk about, particularly tactic strategy. One, candidate strengths. Two, campaign finance. Three, candidate surrogates, right? So the strength of the candidates here is not equal. Kamala Harris she worked as a civil servant, she worked as a prosecutor, but her political delivery is not at the same level as Donald Trump. Donald Trump says a lot of problematic things, but he is capable to be an entertainer, a rabble rouser. He has more rhetorical tools in his basket than Kamala Harris has, right? So when it comes to candidate strengths, it seems to me that Trump is the stronger candidate. Also, it seems to me that the Democrats didn't actually pick the strongest candidate from their pool of available candidates, because we all know how Kamala became the candidate. Joe Biden was on the ticket. People called for an early primary. That was, for primaries for Joe Biden, that was blocked by the Democratic Party after the debate. When he totally bombed in the debate, that's when there was a lot of pushback. Media actually started speaking about things that people were speaking about on the streets for a long time. And then we then saw Kamala being put in as the replacement without there being any primary. What I think this does is that it doesn't create the kind of testing for the candidate where you get someone coming out of the process like Barack Obama. We must remember that Barack Obama, when he put his hand up, was not the most favored candidate. It was supposed to be Hillary's to win, and he actually was able to prove in the race that he was the strongest candidate. And because of that, we also didn't have her maturing into the candidacy role in the way that I think she would have needed to become a very strong candidate. So the substitution at the last minute, I think, hurt the Democratic Party. I'm not saying Kamala is a bad candidate. I'm just saying that if they had done a primary process thoroughly, that actually would have led them, I think, to have a stronger, candidate, whoever it was, at the end of the process. Campaign finance is going to affect this a lot. This election apparently is costing $3.5 billion. Most of that money being spent on adverts. Kamala Harris has raised over $1 billion since she was announced as the candidate. It's being spent on adverts which are being shown on TV. I'm not sure whether TV adverts are going to be the game changer in this particular election, simply because a lot of discourse is happening on social media, a lot of discourse is happening on podcasts, etc., etc. But maybe campaign finance will be a big thing. Michael Bloomberg raised a lot of money for his campaign, and it didn't end up helping him, because money can only take you so far if you're not landing on the ground. Candidate surrogates. There are many people who campaign on behalf of other people. We've seen Beyonce, we've seen Cardi B, we've seen Barack Obama hitting the trail, Michelle Obama, all of these people for Kamala Harris. On the other side, we've seen Elon Musk, we've seen Joe Rogan. Earlier today, on election day, him and Elon Musk did a Joe Rogan podcast. So these surrogates are also going to have an impact on the outcome. So even though, Kamala may not be the strongest candidate, maybe the fact that she has all of this money that she's been able to raise and all of these candidate surrogates, such as Oprah coming in at the late stage, will help her get over the line. I must say something, and this is something that I want you to reflect on and think if I'm right or wrong. I think that Barack Obama was a great candidate, and what he captivated me with Bernie Sanders to the same extent was there were speeches that I could go back to, right? So the Yes We Can speech, for example, was not his only great speech, but there were so many quotables from Obama that even when will.i.am made the song, he used the speech that Obama gave, and that speech resonated with everyone. It was a call of the blood, yes we can. You knew what the man stood for. He captivated people at different parts of the campaign. Whether you go back to the 2004 DNC rally when John Kerry was the candidate, or if you go back even at that point, Obama gave strong speeches, strong performances. To be quite honest with you, except for the, what can be unburdened by what has been type of narrative, I don't actually know any inspiring speech by Kamala Harris, and I don't think you know any either, but I could be wrong. What's your favorite Kamala Harris speech? Quickly, put it in the comments. Let's see what you have to say. That is something which seems small, but I think could be quite significant, because some people are saying, hey, why are black men not wanting to vote for Kamala? Why are these particular demographics not wanting to vote for Kamala? I think people will vote for her, and many of those people who've been criticized will still show up for her. But if there's a gap, if she doesn't win, it probably is because she actually failed to find a rhetorical message that inspired America, the world, got people behind her. We really had a global movement, change you can believe in, hope. All of those Obama moments were not just infectious to the American space, they were infectious to everybody. Let me be very honest with you. When Obama started running early in 2006, late in 2006, early 2007, I saw him on CNN campaigning, and they were announcing that the senator is going to run, and I followed him. And I was like, who's this guy? This is so interesting as a story. I followed Obama, and that is when I fell in love with politics. That is when personally I wanted to be part of the political world too. And then I followed, and then, they were saying Hillary is going to win, and we were there on the internet. No, she's not going to win, blah, 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 quoting Obama, all of that stuff. And then he won. It was a big moment, that 2008 election. And that journey for me was so inspiring. I mean, I'll make another video about my reflections on Obama and what he did in office, because I had all the books. I still have them here. Dreams from My Father, The Audacity of Hope, all of that. I was like in too deep, if you will. But that is how I got into politics. When I do the comparison, I don't think that we are seeing the same level from Kamala. Now, talking about campaign, I've spoken about campaign tactics and strategy. Important to remember one thing is that this is not going to be won by popular vote. It's not like whoever has the most vote wins. The American election is decided on the basis of Electoral College. Electoral College, right? The Electoral College is the mechanism established by the U.S. Constitution for electing the president and vice president. It basically involves several key steps that you need to be aware of, right? There's an allocation of electors, right? So the total number of electors is 538, and this corresponds to the total number of U.S. senators, where there's 100 senators, and U.S. representatives, 435. And then there are 3 electors for the District of Columbia, as provided for by the 23rd Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. So that's where the number 538 comes from, if you've ever heard them talking about that number, right? So each state's number of electors equals its total congressional delegation, which is the senators plus representatives. This allocation ensures that even the least populous of states has a minimum of 3 electors, right? When the general election happens, on election day and just before, because of the early voting, voters cast ballots for their preferred presidential and vice presidential candidates. That's what they do. But in reality, they are voting for the electors who are pledged to those particular candidates. So in California, for example, a certain number of electors, you win, you get those electors. But you need to be aware, right, in terms of allocation of electoral vote, most of the states use a winner-takes-all system. So in 48 states and the District of Columbia, the candidate who wins the popular vote in that state receives all of its electoral votes. However, there are some states which use proportional allocation. Maine and Nebraska, for example, use a district method, allocating one elector per congressional district based on the district's popular vote, while with the remaining 2 electors awarded to the statewide popular vote winner. So 48 and the District of Columbia, popular vote. And then Maine and Nebraska, it's a proportional allocation in terms of who wins all of the delegates, or if you will, basically who wins those electors, right? So in order to win the election, a candidate must receive a majority of the electoral votes, which constitutes 270 out of 538 to win the presidency. Now, you need to be very aware, not all states are competitive. Not all states are going to be in the same basket, right? There are only a few states which really are in the race. Most of the, like California, we know it's going to go Democratic. We know Texas is going to go Republican. It's done, right? There are swing states. These swing states that you need to be aware of, right, are the following: Arizona, Michigan, Georgia, North Carolina, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, right? So if you want to think about it differently, there are what are known as the Great Lakes, right? The Great Lakes are up there on the map, okay? And that's basically what you're dealing with there is Michigan, you're dealing with Pennsylvania, you're dealing with Wisconsin. Then you have the Southwest. If you look at the map, Southwest, you have Nevada and Arizona at the bottom, that side. Then you have the Southeast, North Carolina, and Georgia. These states are going to be the determining states. If Kamala, and historically, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania have been considered to be the blue states, right? The blue wall. If Kamala does badly in those states, it's over. If she does badly in Pennsylvania or Michigan, game over, which is, remember why I said international relations could have a big bearing on this particular election because of Michigan, okay? So Michigan, Pennsylvania, very big states that Kamala has to win. If she doesn't win them, game over, right? So, having said that, my focus is still going to be about the African perspective and thinking about what does each candidate actually offer to Africa. And when you then think about that, the way that you can get this answer is by looking at what previous administrations and their secretaries of states have said. So Secretary of State is basically the Minister of International Relations for countries that don't use Secretary of State. Americans use their own lexicon, and so do the UK guys, secretary, and we use minister, deputy minister. So Secretary of State is Minister of Foreign Relations or International Relations, if you will. So the Kamala Harris administration is a continuation of the Biden administration. So to get an idea of what they're going to be really doing, you need to look at what the Secretary of State, who already is in position, who is Anthony Blinken, outlined as the Africa strategy for the USA. Anthony Blinken gave a speech in Pretoria where he outlined the American strategy for Africa. This speech was titled The Biden Administration's Sub-Saharan Africa Strategy. So as far as what is Kamala going to do, she's going to do more of the same, more of this. And what he did here is that he focused on 4 points. Number one, openness. Number two, working to fulfill the promise of democracy. Number three, a common framework for debt relief. And number four, clean energy transition. Under openness, he was speaking here about the mention of Africa supporting the rules of the international system, and those rules being principles of sovereignty, principles of territorial borders. He spoke about how Africa needs to, stand with America in defending Ukraine and its sovereignty, right? And in exchange for this, he also spoke about how there's a need to connect Africa. And so what he was saying is, we're going to make an exchange with you guys. You need to be on our side. This is what we're going to do. We're going to build and adapt infrastructure that enables connectivity, data centers, secure internet, cloud computing. And then he made mention of SpaceX and Starlink and how they were launching in Africa at the time. This was in 2022 when he gave the speech in Pretoria. Now, when it comes to SpaceX and Starlink and all of this, America has lost, so the Democrats have lost one of their negotiating chips for Africa, because if the deal was to Africa that, hey, be open, be this, support us on Ukraine because we're going to be able to bring these internet companies and businesses, data centers, etc., because they promised $300 million for data centers for SpaceX and for Starlink. Elon Musk supports Donald Trump, right? So some of the stuff is no longer available in terms of on the Democratic side in the way that they promised it, right? Anyway, this is what he had spoken about. Under working to fulfill the promise of democracy, what basically he spoke about was how, there has to be a rejection of military rule, one-man rule, and then he spoke at that time about the Summit for Democracy, which was happening, the African Leaders Summit, and how they were going to pledge or allocate 200 million per year for 10 years for the Global Fragility Act, right? And then he also spoke about how the Wagner Group was not helpful to Africa and how, what Africa needed was free and fair elections. This is what he spoke about. Then he spoke about a common framework for debt relief, how they're helping Zambia access funding of 1.4 billion, how they are doing food assistance to Africa, how they are doing programs to feed the future. I think that's the name of the program, Feed the Future, where 16 countries in Africa are benefiting, and that fund is funded to 11 billion. Then he spoke about, the 5,000 young leaders that America is training, building skills, and PEPFAR, which looks at HIV prevention, detection, treatment, and care. One of the big points that he spoke about was the clean energy transition and how they're going to make $3 billion a year available to help people in vulnerable communities, some of whom will be from Africa. So this was the offering from the Biden administration, very high level, but I must say that I'm frustrated by this offering because it still doesn't reach the ground. This idea that you just train these young leaders who are chosen from private schools, that they're going to change Africa and be the next generation of African leaders, I find it to be, elitist, to be condescending, exclusionary. I think that if America wants to really connect with young Africans, they have to go into township schools. They have to go into universities, do exchange programs with ordinary students, take ordinary people to America. That will help build these bilateral relationships. It is easier now for people to go teach English in China than it is for them to go and do something in America. I'm not saying America doesn't give opportunities, etc. I'm just saying that their opportunities are small compared to China. You're competing with China. So if Kamala Harris were to come in, young Africans need to be asking ourselves and asking, how do we pressure these embassies to change access to America, not only for the elites, not only for the special ones who go for these YALI programs, etc., but for everyone. I'm not saying those programs are bad, right? Hey, you can put me on a program. Send me to America. To Mamina, to America, ngiyebona omrepa. I want to say, what up, my nigga? What's going on, cuz? What to do, cuz? But reality is, more needs to be done to provide financing to small businesses, provide support to small businesses, exchange programs, start in high school, start in primary school. It can't just be USAID, it can't just be PEPFAR if you want to have a better relationship than China. And by the way, we have to be selfish as Africans. Now, we have value. Do you know that by 2050, 1 in 4 people on the earth will be African? Do you know that there's something called a democratic dividend, where Africa will be the most populous continent on earth in the next 20 years? Did you know that? So we need to stop negotiating as if we have no value. Africa has value, tremendous value. We're not jokes, we are valuable, we're big time. We are big time. So we need to be taken seriously as well, okay? So that's that. So when we negotiate with these countries, we need to be saying, hey, America, you've chosen your leadership now. Let's talk, huh? What you got for us now? What's in the bag now? Show us the duffel bag. What do you have for us? We are giving you guys cobalt, copper, diamonds, gold. We're giving you doctors, engineers to work there at Google. What are we getting in return now? What are you doing for my village? Because how can I become pro-America when my village has no solar? Where is the satellite for my village to have fast internet? I'm saying we need to be asking them serious questions. We can't keep playing this game where we just allow whosoever to come into Africa, do whatsoever, and go. We need to start being transactional. The world is being transactional with us. We need to start being transactional. So we understand what these people want. We must push back to the Kamala Harris administration and say, no, please skip us on clean energy. We want to do other things for now. Skip us. Why am I saying this? We still need to industrialize in Africa. I don't know if we should be jumping on every bandwagon. We're being forced to go into IPPs to benefit billionaires and European companies when we still have lots of coal that we can use. These guys have been industrialized for 250 years or so. Let them go green first. Let them create technologies that can come plant trees. Go reforest Botswana. Reforest that desert there, and Savannah Desert, all of that stuff. Don't come up in here like I am. Now we must just like start doing IPP things. We don't even have factories that can produce real things. So all I'm saying is it's time for us to put pressure. America, you want to reduce debt burden? You want to get us to push away and move away from China? Faga the Zaga, dog. Faga the Zaga. Put the money here also. What kind of, you borrow us money direct at -5 interest. Sounds silly, but you guys print that American money, right? You just printing it. It's not linked to anything. I'm half kidding. What I'm trying to say is, it's not enough for America to come to us and say, China is doing debt trap diplomacy. Okay, what are you doing? What do you have? What's the deal that you offering us? Make a deal. Right, so that's what Kamala's administration is likely to do. Mike Pompeo was the Secretary of State under Donald Trump. He was the longest serving Secretary of State under Trump. The first guy wasn't there for too long. And he gave a speech in 2020 when he visited Africa. He visited Africa too late. They weren't taking Africa seriously until they saw that, hey, China's running circles around us here in Africa. Then he visited 3 countries in 2020, Ethiopia, Angola, Senegal. When he gave his speech in 2020, this is basically what he said. He criticized socialism. He criticized what he described as socialist experiments in Tanzania, Zimbabwe, and Ethiopia. He criticized centralized planning as a model of economic planning. He was critical of the nationalization of land and any plans to do that in South Africa. So that gives you an indication already where they stand on that, what relationships they'll have with the Democratic Alliance, that kind of thing, if Trump wins. And then he spoke also about a reduction of aid, military aid, and an increase in economic aid. His offering actually was interesting because he came and said, Africa, let's talk about economic freedom in your lifetime. He didn't say economic freedom, but he spoke about economic liberation. So in a sense, he was saying, hey, Africa, the next thing that you need now is economic liberation. So in a sense, he agrees with the EFF on that. They agree. So Mike Pompeo and EFF, there you go. You've got a relationship. EFF, you can reach out to the Trump administration. Only challenge you'll have is that you guys stand for nationalization of land, and Pompeo hates it, and so does Trump, because he believes in private property and all of that, all of the good capitalism stuff. So predictably, his focus was on entrepreneurship, economic liberation. He spoke about loans from the White House, which were being given for the Global Development and Prosperity Initiative, the African Women's Entrepreneurship Program, the International Visitors Leaders Program. They seem to like these visitors programs, but they're not giving them to anyone. He spoke about to everyone. He spoke about liberalization of markets. He spoke about the institution which was being created, which was the New Development Finance Operation, which would be giving funding for agriculture and stuff. This also I find to be a little bit condescending. They just think every African just wants to farm and plow and stuff. No, Baba, we want to code. We want to code on MacBook M5. M5 chip, there's no M5 chip, it's just M4. I'm just saying, hey, go and give some Apple American computers there in the townships of South Africa, in the townships of Nigeria. See how much they love you. They will love you, America. Go and give some laptops there to the slums in Kenya. See if that doesn't change perceptions. They won't love Russia after you give them some MacBooks. Give us some iPhones. Go and give 1,000 iPhones lottery there in every township in Africa. Yeah. Well, I'll say, my man, get out of here, my man. Get out of here for real, my man. Get out of here with that Putin. Don't put in Putin into my conversation. Get out of here for real. That's what we'll all be saying. I'm joking, but I'm not joking, but I'm joking. So he also spoke about the American model of development, which was all about structural adjustments, trying to pressure these governments away from dictatorships into rule of law, freedom, etc., and infrastructure programs that companies such as Bechtel were doing, an American company, were doing in Senegal. So these are the things that Pompeo spoke about. So we have to be thinking about, okay, this is what Trump spoke about: deals, entrepreneurship, finance. This is what Anthony Blinken spoke about: X, Y, and Z. How do we as Africans navigate these waters to get what we need to be able to develop our spaces and places for our benefit, right? So that's how we need to be talking about this election. Let's be very clear about what our problems are. Africa has a problem with access to water. About 387 million people lived without access to basic drinking water services in sub-Saharan Africa in 2020, and that number is up from 350 million people in the year 2000, according to a World Health Organization and UNICEF progress report. As of October 2022, 226 million people in Eastern and Southern Africa did not have access to basic water services, and 381 million people lacked access to basic sanitation services. Because of the war in Sudan, those numbers have gone up, right? So access to water, we have a real problem. America, whether it's Trump, whether it's Harris, sifuna amanzi. We want to drink this water. We want the bonakwa. Get us the bonakwa. What can we do to get the bonakwa? The water that is good. Bon is good. Aqua is water. What can we do? Access to electricity. In 2022, 600 million people in Africa, or 43% of the continent, lacked access to electricity. The vast majority of them, 590 million, or 98%, were in sub-Saharan Africa. More than 600 million people in Africa live without electricity, including more than 80% of those residing in rural areas. So we need the electricity. We need to see how is America going to help us with the electric. Otherwise, we are going China. Poverty. In sub-Saharan Africa, 560 million people, 58% of the population are living in multidimensional poverty. 58%. 342 million, right, are living in multidimensional poverty, which is 61% of all of the people living in poverty. And this is according to the United Nations Development Program. 30 out of 48 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, almost 2/3, have been designated as either fragile, conflict-affected, or violent, which is known as FCV, right? Since 1998, about 30 out of 48. In the Middle East and North Africa, it's 7 out of 14. But can you see that that's two-thirds? Two-thirds. Then we go to the issue of human rights and freedom. Right now, there's no freedom in Mozambique. There are protests. People are protesting for democracy. There are so many dictators in Africa. Cameroon, if you look at Chad, if you look at all of these military regimes across Uganda, not a democracy. Zimbabwe, not a democracy. What is America going to do to help young Africans chart a new path? These are the conversations that we need to be having. Whether it's Kamala or Trump who comes in, what do you have in your hands for Africa? These are the questions we have to be asking these guys. So this time around, I think while we must understand the American election, what it means for Americans, we have to understand what it means for us. What do we benefit? What do we get? What do we want? What kind of pressure are we putting on our leaders to put on these guys to give us reforms that can work for us? If we don't do that, we end up thinking that we're Americans. Do you have a green card? Do you have green cards? No, you don't have a green card. You have American citizenship? No. So what I'm trying to say is, wherever we are in the world, in as much as we consume these elections, in as much as they're entertaining, in as much as we care about the plight of our black brothers and sisters in America, we don't want them to go through George Floyd moments, Breonna Taylor moments. We don't want to see women oppressed anywhere in the world. We don't want to see people who look like us being accused of eating cats and dogs and frogs and fog and whatever else they say that we eat. But still, we must start taking ourselves seriously and our future seriously as Africans and start negotiating with the global community as equals, asking for stuff. So whoever wins, we must look at this and say, how do we make it a win for Africa? And let's talk about that in the comments. I want to see what you have to say. Till the next one, guys.